What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a quick review update. It's going to be a long-term review of this is the Canon RF. This is the 50mm 1.2L lens. This is one of the first prime Canon RF lenses they came out with. It retails for $2,300. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the specs of it, but I've had two copies of this lens over the past 1.5 to 2 years, so I have a good idea of who this may be for, may not be for. I do want to mention that I am not a professional photographer. I do this because I love taking photos of our family out traveling. I've always enjoyed taking photos. I bought my first DSLR over 10 years ago. I've done Canon, Nikon, Sony. They're all good systems, but this will give an idea of maybe who this may be for, may not be for. $2,300 is a very expensive lens, very heavy lens, as you can tell by the size here. This is iPhone 13, which it's about the same size as that. It definitely weighs more. I think it weighs close to 2 pounds, which is pretty big for an actual prime lens. 77mm filter thread, which is kind of negative currently. It was very hard for me to find a 77mm filter, and I actually found a Nikon one, which is kind of odd to have that on a Canon system. But the overall build quality, ergonomics, that'll be where I start with, are excellent on this. It's definitely made of more plastic material on the outside than previously, but it is a very robust camera lens. It is very weather sealed. You do have the rubber gasket on the back. But not only do you have that, but it is, I would say, probably fully weather sealed to where I've taken it to the beach. It's got a little bit wet before. We shot for a whole 10 days at the beach with it, and it still performs flawless. No hiccups, no issues. I did go through the proper precautions of trying to make sure it didn't go from a cold to warm environment, because that can cause issues with condensation on the inside. But build quality, this thing is top notch. It has a very good feel to it. Very smooth focus rings. All the buttons, you have full and autofocus, manual focus buttons here. They seem like the general Canon L quality. So I haven't had any issues with those on either copies I've had. Both copies I bought refurbished from Canon, their outlet, and they both perform just like new, came as new. You do have the control ring here to adjust. I generally adjust my white balance with this. It just seems to work pretty well for my needs, which you can do. You can customize that and turn it to about whatever you want. So the handling of it is really good. Besides the heft of it, it's a little heavy compared to, let's say, the G Master, the Sony G Master 1.2. It's a little bit heavier on the end compared to that. But besides that, it really handles really well on the Canon R6. I assume the Canon R5 also, because they're basically the same type of system there. So when it comes to the performance of this, it does have two USM motors in it, so focus is pretty good, pretty quick compared for a 1.2 lens. 1.2 lenses are never going to be as fast focusing as a equivalent 1.4, just because of how much glass it has to move around. So there is a decent amount of elements and glass in there. It's just the physics of 1.2, but it does focus really well with both those motors in it. It's probably not as fast as currently I'm filming with the Tamron 1.4 adapted to the Canon R6. It's not quite as fast focusing as that, but it's hard to compare a 1.4 to 1.2 lens, and it's different focal length, which is another thing that can take into account that. But performance is really good. The rendering of this is, I would say, almost dreamlike. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's just some of those lenses out there that have a unique feel to them. So I wouldn't say it has any 3D pop or anything along that lines, but it looks very unique compared to anything I've ever used of any focal length. So it does have some character there. The background blur is really good, as you would expect from an L 1.2 lens. It's very smooth, almost, again, dreamlike, cinema-like. It is extremely sharp, especially for a 1.2 lens, so you have that that you don't have to worry about it, especially with eye autofocus. You just set it to that and it does its own thing. Color rendition is really good. It similar to most of the Canon L lenses out there. It has good color, good character. It shoots really well shooting into the sun, so I like to shoot a lot of stuff into the sun when the sun's rising or setting, and it does really well with handling flares and everything along that lines. It does have some character where you'll get these neat little rainbow effects, kind of like halos around your subject, so you kind of have to watch for that because sometimes it can cut their face and go in the middle of that, but it has a lot of unique features to it. So I think it's probably the best 50mm lens out there if you ask me. I've not used the G Master 1.2 from Sony before, but I have used the Sigma 1.4, the Nikon 58 1.8 or 1.4, and the Canon EF 1.2 also had a lot of character to it, but it was very slow at focusing. It did not usually hit the target half the time, so it was a unique lens in that aspect. So when it comes to, is this lens worth $2,300? For me, no. This was a splurge that I probably don't actually need or will benefit from, but I really like what comes out of this. If you're a pro photographer and you shoot most of your stuff at 50mm focal length, this is probably a no-brainer for you. The 1.8 is a good lens also, but it does not do well shooting into the sun. At least the one copy I had didn't. If you're any type of pro photographer or this is going to be your primary lens, I would go ahead and buy it and keep it, and don't regret spending that money on it, especially if you can afford it. So for one, you definitely need to be able to afford it, or if you have the money, you want to try it out. But I think it's a go-to lens if it's your focal length you want. If you prefer wider, 24, 35, or an 85, don't get this lens. Get the 50 1.8 STM for $100 and some right now. It's been on sale frequently, and spend your money elsewhere. That's really all I have to say. It's a very, very good lens. It has a ton of character. So if you want something that's unique, this is probably the way to go, if you ask me. Same thing with the 85s. The 85s are very dreamlike. The 1.2L, at least from what I've read and watched videos on. So that's it. If you have any comments, questions, leave them below, and I'll get back to you next time. Have a good rest of the day, weekend, whatever is out there. That's it. Happy July 4th. Today's July 4th.